So, welcome everyone. Welcome to the latest episode or edition of the Our Creative Connection podcast. And I'm really excited to welcome Heidi Fisher to the show. With this series, I've been really interested in exploring all sorts of things. And so far, the conversation's been very much around creativity, community development, and then a little bit around working with organizations. But social enterprise is something that's been, part of my life for, many years. And it's something that I get really excited by and interested in. So I think that's going to be certainly one of our themes for today. But, I don't overplan these things. Who knows what else may emerge through our conversation. So Heidi, do you want to say hello and perhaps introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, Chris. Thanks for having me on today. It's so nice to get to spend some time with you just chatting. So I'm Heidi Fisher. I run a social enterprise called Make An Impact, which is all about helping organisations to grow their impact, measure it and communicate it and report it better so that they can hopefully also grow their income.
Well, this is all music to my ears, hearing you describe it. You make it sound like a really straightforward thing, but impact is one of those things that I've really struggled with over the years. It's often just almost like I've sort of othered it in my brain, that it's something that I really have to kind of think about and put more time and effort into. I recognize how important it is. But how did you get it started with Make an Impact, and sort of what was your journey into
Oh,
this?
gosh, how long have you got?
Well,
um,
the tape's running.
so originally I started out doing accountancy. So I had a community interest company that provided accountancy services for social enterprises and charities. And about, oh my gosh, nearly 20 years ago now, it sounds shockingly old by saying that, a couple of people asked me about social accounting and social return on investment, and because the language is accounting, I think that's why they asked an accountant. But I was like, well, I don't know, I haven't really heard of that. And so I looked it up and I was like, oh, actually this looks really interesting, because it's actually not about the monetary values and the profit that we make. It's about the social and economic and environmental value that we create, and trying to track and measure that. So that's how my journey into it started, probably just by a couple of conversations with people asking me, did I do it and did I know anything about it. And back then it wasn't a big thing like it is now. A lot of people talk about impact measurement, social value, all those kind of phrases a lot more now. But yeah, it's been just over 20 years now that I've been doing impact measurement work, and the last 7 years I've shifted to, that's probably about 80 to 90% of my time, and the other mentoring and bits and pieces about 10 to 15% of my time.
Well, I guess we've been involved in social enterprise stuff for a similar amount of time as well, and yeah, it's crazy, isn't it, when you think back of the years. I was struck actually as you were describing it. It does make me laugh sometimes how like they just plonk the word social in front of it, and then that's a different thing now. Social accounting, social impact, and stuff. But these are things that are relevant to any organization, aren't they? Really. So I think we've seen over. Certainly, I've seen efforts to make it everyone's responsibility to be sort of paying attention to their social footprint or environmental impact, or the change that is not just monetary that's going on. Things like social value. And I remember there was a big effort, maybe 2012, I want to say, maybe even earlier than that, but there was real big efforts to kind of embed social value in sort of contracting and things like that. So there's lots of different angles to it, isn't there, demonstrating your impact? Are there any sort of headlines that you think people should really sort of hang on to when they're thinking about, if someone's sat there listening to this kind of like, okay, well, how do I demonstrate my impact? What are the things that I should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned this when in a previous bit of the conversation about, it's always one of those things that gets othered.
Yeah.
And I do believe there's this perception that if you're going to measure and share some of your impacts data, it has to be of a superb standard before you feel confident enough to share it, as
Yeah.
opposed to, you get up and you might put a marketing post out on social media and you just do it without thinking, or you sit there and do your bookkeeping, or you create your business plan, and whilst you might think about those things, you don't, in most cases, wait for them to be perfect before you do anything with them. And I do feel that the message that I would always give people is just get started. If you really don't know where to start, the first thing is just to talk to people. It's like, hi Chris, how's your day going? You've been coming here for a few times now. What are you getting out of it? What difference is it really making to you? And just start having those conversations, and that will tell you whether you actually are making a difference or not. And I think that's perhaps this fear deep down inside us, is maybe I'm not making any difference. In that you worry that you're not going to hear what you really want to hear.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. That, I mean, when you were describing it, one of the things that I've always struggled with impact measurement is not so much feeling like, oh, we're not making a difference. When I think about different projects or organizations I've been involved with in the past, I always used to describe it like, you remember, what is it, Magic Eye pictures in the 90s, and you'd stare at it and stare at it and stare at it, and after a while, yeah, I could never get them to work, but I always just sort of played along. I thought everyone was just having a joke. I could never get them to work, but when you did finally get it to work, you're like, oh yeah, it's a photo of, it's a picture of a dinosaur or the Titanic or whatever. I often thought like evaluation was a bit like that like the harder you stare at it, like the more difficult it became to kind of really figure out what the flipping heck I was looking at. And so, or sometimes I've had that experience where the effort to evaluate it ended up squashing what made it impactful, or fill the form in, and no acknowledgement that actually just by injecting that into the situation can disrupt or sort of destabilize that. So I'm a little cautious, I think, when it comes to these things. I'm always sort of trying to have one eye on, like, well, what's the impact of trying to measure the impact? How is that going to negatively affect how it works? Does it interrupt the kind of process, or how do I do it in a way that doesn't? That's the question I think that I'm always trying to sit with.
Yeah, I think it's that thing about what quantum energy. Let's say, like, if you look at it, then it moves and things shift. Whereas if you ignore it, it's like nothing happens. So yeah, I can see in that if you're not thinking about impact, then you're on a certain journey in terms of your work and activities go one way. Once you introduce measuring the impact of it, you're distorting and disrupting it in some shape or form.
Yeah.
But the way I always say to people is build it into what you're doing. There's nothing worse than someone that sends you like a 20-page survey 3 days after you've done an activity. It's like you had them there either online or in an activity outdoors or in a room or something. Why not just ask them a few questions whilst they're there, or get them to do an activity with stickers or whatever, throwing balls around, whatever it is? Because if you can build it into your sessions, you're also thinking about, how is this useful to the person that's in that session or participating in this program? As much as you want that information, what are they getting out of it? What are they learning about themselves? What are they developing in terms of their thinking or their behaviors or beliefs by answering these questions or doing the activity that you've built into your session? And I was always like, I love what you do in terms of photography, because I'm like, it's so easy in terms of visualizing the change. You take a photo this week, you take some more over the progress of the next few weeks, and you can probably see visually, just by looking at the photos, what difference you've made. And I think I would say a lot of the time we overthink it. And you would probably be like, well, I'm not sure my photos are enough in terms of evidencing impact. Whereas I would be like, well, I'm like, it's great, it's visual. People can see just by looking at the pictures. And, why should it have to be long surveys or different things? You can do those things if you want, but it's about thinking about the audience in terms of the individuals you're working with, and what's actually going to engage them and make them willing to participate in your impact data collection.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I love many things about what you're saying. I love that we started our little sort of recording chat. Was like, we're not really sure where we're going to go here, and we're already talking about quantum energy. So I'm enjoying that very much. I like that idea. But yeah, what you said about I've really, my approach now, having made lots and lots of mistakes where I've done like what I thought was pretty interesting stuff, and then gone, oh, flipping heck, we haven't really thought about the monitoring, or the monitoring is somebody else's monitoring. That's the other one, isn't it? Is if there's some funding agent involved, and you're like, so I've really learned, perhaps the hard way, which seems to be the way I always learn things, is kind of, okay, well, I need my own method that I can then say to people, well, this is the way that we're going to demonstrate or show change or just reflect. And then what you said about making it not an external thing, but like an integral part of how delivery works, or how relationships are, just part of what we do.
In terms of like Social Value UK and Social Value International, they always talk about measure what matters.
Yeah.
And that's what matters to your stakeholders. So the people that are in your programs, to you as an organization, and then your partners, the local community. But I'm very much for, if you're the individuals you're working with have told you that specific things matter to them, and then you have a funder coming along and saying, okay, we only want to measure employment outcomes, and actually the individuals on your program are like, well, these are the things that matter way more to us, then why would you not push back to that funder and say, actually, we're the ones that have the deep knowledge and insight into this group of people where we're working with. We know that these are the outcomes and impacts that are the ones that matter most and will make the most difference to these people. So let us do what we're good at, because you want to give us money because you know we're good, and let us measure it in a way that actually works. And I think there's always that power dynamic where we're like, oh, the funder's giving us some money, we better not pee them off by saying, well, actually, we don't really want to measure that. We just go along with it. And then you've got like 10 different systems for measuring impact, because you like, right, we want to measure this because we know these are the really important outcomes and impacts, but then this funder wants this funder wants that, and then you end up with this, I don't know, it's just like it's literally like my kids have grabbed 20 balls of wool, thrown them all together, jumbled it all up, and it's just like a big ball of mess about a meter wide that you've got to unravel, because your data collection has become a beast on its own.
I mean, do you think that voluntary sector organizations have sort of tied themselves up in knots around this? I heard a story once, and I liked it so much that I nicked it. I can't remember where I nicked it from. But there was a big sort of meeting organised. There's always a meeting, and there are all these voluntary organisations, community organisations, social enterprises in the room, waiting for the sort of, the big funder to kind of arrive, and they were running late. So they got the meeting started, and sort of, they'd kind of figured they might as well start on this process and sort of designed this monitoring sort of way of measuring impact and change and stuff. And by the time the funder arrived, they were like, well, I don't want that. Like, you're turning yourselves into sort of mini institutions or mini kind of versions of, big clunky bureaucracies. That's not what we want. So do you think there's a kind of self-fulfilling sort of prophecy element there, or do you think things have changed a bit?
I think for some organisations, they do try to go completely crazy with their evaluation process, and in that they're like, right, we should capture absolutely everything that's possible. And in doing so, it becomes a beast that needs serving in terms of people and resource. I always say pick 2 or 3 outcomes and just measure them, and share the rest through case studies or stories or testimonials and bits of feedback, because you can still, there's probably about 20 to 30 outcomes that are possibilities for most programs that people deliver. But if you measure 20 or 30 outcomes, that's a lot of time and effort, versus let's measure 2 or 3 really, really well, and then we'll gather some stuff on the other ones through sharing stories and case studies, which is what people love anyway. The storytelling is the thing that captures people. As humans, we love stories. So if we can build stories into our impact, then it's much more powerful anyway.
So have you seen any sort of trends or themes or things that have emerged over your time working around impact that you think are worth holding on to, or that have caught you? What kind of inspires you or motivates you around this?
So I think one of the positive trends is that people are moving away from those really long, laborious evaluation or impact reports, and people are thinking more creatively about how they share the data. So you've got a lot more people using videos, infographics, photos, those kinds of things, case studies, really just short snippets in terms of that impact story that all piece together to give the whole picture. But we've got to remember people's attention spans are not what they used to be. Whilst I might have sat and got really excited about reading a 100-page impact report before, it's not
Really?
not something that I really want to do much these days.
Yeah.
And that I think it was it might have been McKinsey, the big consulting firm, that had done some research into how people were digesting, is that the right word? Digesting impact information from organizations. And they said they were using videos, but they had to be about 2 to 2.5 minutes long, otherwise people switched off. Infographics was the other one, and just social media posts. So that that there was no mention of reports in there. That wasn't the main way in which people were getting data about impact from organizations. And I also think that leans on the fact that now if you do share your impact data, people want to know that it's true. So they want to see the people telling their stories, and like the social proof that you are genuine, as opposed to the PR spin that was inherent in a lot of the early years of impact reporting.
Yeah, I remember a big emphasis on like social return on investment, and like a big push on that, and everything had to be sort of reduced down to a number or quantified at least. And I always struggled with that concept of like people sort of walking around going, well, for every pound you spend on this, you get £4 back. And I was always like, do you really? Like, I'd got a D at GCSE maths, so full disclosure, like maybe it's me that didn't really wrap my head around it. But I'm interested to know what your thoughts on that sort of approach?
Yeah, so as a former accountant, I have to say I do quite like social return on investment, and one of the reasons being that for a lot of public sector bodies, it's easy to get it down to one number that they can easily focus in on, and whilst I appreciate that you then lose all the depth behind it, often that's the thing that will sell it to them. If they can see that if they invest £1 in your project, then it's going to generate some added social value for that community, then it's a worthwhile investment for them. And it's taken it beyond just looking at, okay, what's the economic benefit in terms of cost benefit analysis. It's adding the social and economic impacts on there as well. So I think it's a useful tool, but I've turned people away before where they've come to me and said, we want to do a social return on investment. And the main reason why I say no to them is because their money comes from trusts and foundations, and they're primarily grant dependent. If you go to a trust or foundation with a social return on investment figure, that's not what they want to know about. They want the stories, they want the case studies, the testimonials, the depth of impact data in most cases. So you're wasting your money if you go down that route where, so the most important thing is to think about who's the audience that you're trying to share your impact data with. How do they like to receive it? And there's certain pockets within the public sector that like social return investment. Then there's other bits that it would be like, well, what is this? And then you spend 3 months educating them on what social return on investment is, how it's been calculated, and then they're like, well, we don't like the way it's calculated, so we probably don't want to use it. And it's like, well, why waste all your time and energy doing it in the first place? So I think it has its uses. I mean, we do it quite a bit where we're trying to look at some of the potential cost savings for statutory agencies through organisations' work, but also they want to look at the other wider impacts on their customers or clients, and the impact that they have on their staff. It doesn't, it's not the only method. There's hundreds of different methods you can use to measure impact, but for me, I think it's one that has its uses.
All right, I remain on the fence about it. You made a good argument that it's probably my aversion to maths that's putting me off.
But it's probably, in a lot of cases it won't be right, and I would never say do social return on investment.
No,
it's let's have a conversation and see if it's right. If it's not, then capture your data in some other way and don't break it down to a monetary value. And a part of it is, I think we're obsessed with simplifying things, and the fact that you can say, like, for every £1 that we spend on this, it generates £8 worth of social return. It's really short and sweet and simple. But if you only ever talk about that £8, you're devaluing what you create.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little more about, like, who are the organisations you work with? If you don't have to name any, but what kinds of organisations are you working with?
Yeah, of course, sure. So, for me, my work over the last probably 10 years has morphed to be quite a lot of health and social care type organisations. So we're talking charities, social enterprises that might be delivering counselling, therapies, other types of wellbeing support, those kinds of services, right through to NHS England and some of the NHS trusts and foundations. So I don't want to box myself into one end of the spectrum. I'm like, no, I want the whole spectrum. And then the other area we sometimes work with is employability and skills type organisations, but they tend to be social enterprises or charities. It's not like with the large public sector bodies in that area, and some housing associations that are deliver in terms of their community services as opposed to their core renting houses.
And you set up as a CIC, so because you could have done this as a private limited company, couldn't you? Right, doing all everything.
Yeah.
So what was it about a CIC that made you?
So for me, it's always about putting a stamp on the way that I wanted to work, and one of my beliefs is if you're going to work with social enterprises and charities, then you should structure it in a way that is supportive of those social enterprises and charities. I know there will be lots of people listening that disagree because they're either sole traders or they have their own private limited company.
Hey, look, well, they're not on this podcast,
Yeah.
right? So this is your time.
But I felt that it put the values of how we want to work front and center by structuring it in that way. And for me, I'm always about aligned values with any of the clients that we work with. You know, there's I will put my hands on my heart and say there are 100% of the clients that we work with, we absolutely love working with. You know, there is no client that I work with now, and I'll say that in the past I probably didn't do it quite right, but there's nobody now that I work with that I wouldn't genuinely say our values align and we share similar ethoses, and we want to do the best for the people that we're working with. So there's no organisations that just want a nice impact report that looks really glossy so they can get some good PR or marketing spin. It's like, you know, the PR or marketing spin is an added bonus beyond genuinely looking at the impact that they have and what they can learn from that.
I still find all these many moons for both of us later that, you know, people still get real confused about sort of social enterprise and so what it is, and hung up on legal structures. But so I really like that you brought it back to the values element. It's like, what is this about, and what's the, you know, the purpose behind what we're trying to do. That's what keeps you going, isn't it? As a person sort of trying to create a change in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, you can argue about legal structures forever.
We won't though. We won't.
Yeah.
I promise.
that could take us the rest of the week to discuss social enterprise legal structures. But I'm always like, okay, think about the ethos and the essence of how you want to work, and then pick the structure that fits that. And it's really simple then. You know, we're not debating, should we be a charity, should we be a CIC, should we be a co-op, should we be a limited company, partnership, etc. You know, we're just saying, okay, what does it look like when I'm running and operating my social enterprise? Where does my income come from? Who's on the, you know, the management and the governance? What's the structure of that look like? You know, is it just me or are there other people? And then pick something that works for what you've described as how it looks.
Yeah, start with the impact, right?
Yeah.
Start with the what does the change look like, and then work backwards from that. So then it aligns it nicely, then, doesn't it? So what kinds of I'm interested about sort of your work with organizations. Are there particular things that you are asked to do often, or particular sort of areas of work that you like to focus in on? What are the kinds of things that you get involved in?
I love it. I love everything. So I do like the theory of change workshops. I'm a
Okay,
bit of
yeah.
a, a geek when it comes to that. I like doing them in person, or getting people in a room and just the richness of the conversations that come out when they're thinking about what difference do we really make, and what do we actually want to measure. And it's just lovely to hear that from organizations. I love where an organization is like, we don't know how to measure this, or we think it's impossible to measure this, and I'm just like, right, I can figure that one out, and I will be like, right, what's the best way to measure this particular outcome. And so yeah, it's nice to have those challenges. And then the other thing that I really like is when you get the data from the client, because there's often you'll be, yeah, we've got loads of data, and then it's like, no, you really haven't. So there's me doing a little jig around in this little home office when you actually get the data from the client, because then you're starting to move into the, okay, let's look at the so what of your organization, and start to understand what's actually working and what needs to be improved potentially.
And you've written a book, right?
Yeah, I've written 2 actually.
You've written 2 books.
Yeah.
I
Where have you been?
tell us about. I don't know. I can't answer that question. But I knew there was a book in the offing. So have you got any more book? Tell us about your books that you've written, and then have you got any more that are
So
in the works?
I have an outline for 2 more books, but yeah, I'm not doing them in the way that I did the first one. The first one was all about social enterprise. So it was all the questions that people asked me about setting up and running a social enterprise. And I did that when my son was about just over 2 years, around 2 years old.
Right.
And I'm a deadline person. So if you want me to do anything, give me a deadline.
Same.
So I set the date for the book launch before the book was finished. I always think is quite an interesting approach. It certainly motivated me to get on and finish the book. So the second one is all about impact measurement, and I decided not to take that approach to it.
Okay.
I set myself a kind of an internal deadline, but I didn't share it with the world, and that came out in beginning of 2020. I do have, like I said, there was always a third and a fourth book where I'd kind of outlined the structures for them, but I'm not in any rush to write them at the moment.
Okay. I definitely relate to the idea of a deadline, and especially when I get to choose the deadline, I always push it right back to the very, very, very last minute, and then I seem to manage to get it done.
Yeah. So are you going to write a book then?
No, I don't know. I've got no plans to, other than like immediately right now. I'm in my brain. I'm thinking, oh, maybe I could write a book. I don't know. So what's the plans for the future, if any? What do you see coming up in the?
I don't know. Just keep on going. I think we've got our online tool that we've been working on, which is to help organisations with automating their impact measurement, and that also will do process mapping and different things, so people can standardise the way they work as an organisation. But we're at the moment we're testing it with one organisation, and they wanted to turn the data into a social return investment figure, so that bit has been built into the process within the system. So to please you,
just
Chris,
ignore,
you can get it down to
everything I said
number.
earlier about.
But it just means it's there as an option, and where we are doing that work with organisations, we can put it in the system and do real-time SRI type calculations for people. But yeah, I'm I'm looking forward to it because all the different questionnaires and questions that we use when we're creating the systems for measuring impact, we're going to put into the system, and then people will be able to just pick the ones that actually work for their organisation.
Oh, so like a whole set of resources that are almost ready made that you can sort of
pretty much. So like
adapt.
if you said you wanted to measure like self-esteem or motivation, there'd be certain questions that will already be in there if you want to use a survey.
Oh, very good. Is that an online tool, something that people are able to access, or is that?
It will be.
Right.
Not quite there yet. I'm like, yeah, we're almost there. But yeah, because we're testing it at the moment with an organisation, we're just checking that the process and everything is right. So I've done it manually in terms of the data collection. We've then put the same data into the system, and they're just working out how to do the SRI calculations with the programming and coding to hopefully then get the same number that I got when I did it manually to prove that it actually works. So interesting.
That is interesting, and at least I guess making some quite technical ways of thinking about impact more accessible to people.
Yeah, it's something that I've always wanted to do, and we've sort of dabbled in getting some sort of tool or system, and it came about sort of as an accidental opportunity, in that we could piggyback onto an existing system that does all the process mapping. So it can do a lot of modeling and scenario mapping. So you can say, okay, what if we change this in our project? What difference does that make in terms of the process? But we're then saying, okay, let's go beyond what difference it makes in terms of process to what difference does it make in terms of impact. So that's our kind of little module which is added on to the existing system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love it. So I feel like we've covered quite a lot of grounds already. You've possibly converted me from a non-believer to at least a fence sitter about social return on investment, which is good.
You don't have to do it.
No, I'm teasing. I know there's different tools for different sort of situations, isn't there? And different audiences as well. I think that was the message I heard you say.
Definitely. I would say, just think about what works for your organisation. Given the resources and time you have available, the type of thing that you actually deliver. As a creative organisation yourself, Chris, I would not want you to turn it into a dry £6.50.
No.
I think
we did try that once many moons ago in a different organisation, and I'm not 100% sure why we did try and do that. But yeah, it definitely lost the essence of what we were really about.
And it's, how do we want our impact information to look when we share it? And I would be like, Chris, you've got all this visual stuff, use it, for goodness sake. Don't turn it into something that doesn't retain that creativity.
Yeah, I do try. I try and hold on to that. Are there any other messages that you would want people to understand or think about or know about when it comes to impact measurement or social enterprise?
Just do it. Just set up your social enterprise now and get on with it.
Yeah, I like that. That's very, very much my approach to things. Definitely and then figure it out as you go.
Yeah, and I think social and environmental impacts are increasingly important. So if you are going to set up a business, why would you not set it up under the banner of social enterprise, so that you are thinking about more than money? So you've got your money, your people, and the planet.
Yeah, it's becoming more prevalent, isn't it? And especially as corporates get on board, with my optimist hat on, to create positive change, and with my cynics hat on, to kind of jump on the bandwagon because they think it's profitable. I suppose it's even more important, isn't it, for those who are able to tell a meaningful, real story of positive change, whether that's environmental or social. It's really, really important that we continue to do that, because there's sort of whole sort of issues with sort of greenwashing and things like that, isn't there, going on with sort of corporates pushing a message of positive change when it's kind of just business as usual. So it's an ongoing battle, I guess we're saying.
Yeah, lots of purpose washing, I would call it.
Purpose washing. Oh yeah, totally.
In the some of the biggest multinational offenders that have a purpose strapline on everything, and without naming names.
Go on, name. I'm joking.
No, I might get sued. So some of the large pharmaceutical companies, the one that can deliver anything. So I think a lot of them have put that purpose tag on there to make what they do seem ethical and good, but actually they also don't.
You mentioned earlier about like power dynamics and things like that, and sort of who is sort of in control of let's say a piece of work or a project or anything like that, whether the people on the receiving end of, let's say, that help or that whatever the outcome is, and what involvement they have. That feels like a really important part of this puzzle as well, doesn't it? That if people who are perhaps outside of an organization but still able to input their thoughts, not just to say how great the project was or wasn't, but to actually help design that process.
Yeah, if you ever look at who's in the room when these conversations and programs and decisions are made, it's the people that aren't in the room that they're making decisions about. And that's why ultimately a lot of things are very, very flawed. So if you think back to during the pandemic with the lockdowns, the people making the decisions that the lockdowns happened tended to be of a particular demographic, and they didn't think about the consequences of those lockdowns on young people, women, older people, people with mental health conditions already. And we're now seeing the fallout of those decisions on the amount of social anxiety young people have, the staggering volume of mental health issues and conditions that people now have, people's financial situations, all kinds of things. And it's always those kinds of situations where I'm like, if you're making a decision about me and people that are like me, then how many of us have you asked about this? Because if you haven't, then how do you know what you're planning to do is the right thing?
Yeah, it's like that phrase, nothing about me without me, sort of thing.
Exactly.
It's got to be part of our thoughts about impact, and the way we make it real as well. Because I suppose if you democratize the way an organization thinks about its impact and make the conversation with people who are on the receiving end of their input or help or whatever, then that's, again, it's almost like is that become a bit of a virtuous circle thing where you can start to say, well, the way we do it is we design it with people. We don't just push them through an evaluation process, or we try and do it together.
Definitely. I mean, the best impact approaches we've ever been involved in are the ones that have co-designed completely. You get the participants or beneficiaries, clients, whatever you want to call them, in a room, ask them what really matters to them, and then you measure those things because they're important to them. And also getting them involved in that evaluation process. There's nothing better than almost like peer evaluators, and I'd say that in a positive way, in that it's not about abusing them and saying, oh yeah, okay, you can collect some data because you're participating in this particular program. It's a paid role in that they're paid to talk to their peers and collect and the impact data and have those conversations. And so they're involved at every stage of the process. They then also get to look at, you know, what's coming out in terms of findings from this the data collection. What does that actually mean for them as a group? So if you're generally doing the co-design and co-production process properly, you're not just saying, okay, what do you want us to measure, and then you go away and do it. They're involved at every single stage of that process. And where we've done that with organizations, it's a really powerful process, because it's not just about benefiting the organization, it also benefits the individuals that are on the program, because they can see that their opinions and their perspectives are really valued and taken into consideration along that whole journey.
So this is an ongoing piece of work, isn't it? So do you tend to work with organisations over a sort of longer period of time? It's not about saying, here's your systems, right, off you go and deliver
Some
the
of them, that's
thing.
all they want.
Yeah.
So most organisations, it's probably a 6 to 9 month piece of work, from
Right.
or possibly a bit longer, up to about a year, and then they're in a position where they can carry on and do that work themselves. So part of we talked about values a lot, but one of our values is about knowledge transfer and knowledge share. So we don't want people to be dependent on us at the end of a piece of consultancy. We want them to have the skills to be able to do the impact measurement themselves if they choose to. So that's one of the things we always try to build in, about sharing how to do it. And then other organisations, we might be looking at a pilot program over 3 years, so we're with them for that 3-year time period.
I've really, really appreciated you joining me for this conversation. I feel like we've touched on lots and lots of different things. We've talked about social enterprise and impact and social return on investment and purpose washing and quantum energy. I feel like there's always more things I'm sure that we could cover, but I just want to say a big thank you for making the time and for sharing your experiences with us.
That's all right. It's been lovely talking to you, Chris. I've had a really good time this morning.
All right. Thank you very much.